you for joining us today for the What Sales Can Learn From interview series. I am your host, Carol Mahoney, the founder of Unbound Growth. Now, if you're like me and believe that everything is selling, then you know that selling is a part of everyday life. Whether you're in a traditional sales role, or if you're an entrepreneur who's trying to get investors or hire employees, or even if you're an employee who is trying to convince others of your ideas, abilities, and vision, we are all in sales. And if we're all in sales, we should be able to learn from each other. To truly learn, we need to look outside of our own world to get a different perspective on our own. That is why once a month, I will be talking with sales experts in other industries and professions and asking them to share with you how they've tackled tough challenges so that we can learn from their experiences and apply it to sales. Here we go. Thank you everyone for joining us for this episode of What Sales Can Learn. In this episode, we're talking with Robin Dreeke, an FBI behavioral analyst. Robin is unique in that his code of trust was originally developed by him in order to build relationships and trust with national adversaries. It was crafted and honed over his career as an FBI Special Agent Behaviorist. Robin brings his one-of-a-kind formula to you and teams for aspects of leadership and business development. He had realized from his time at the United States Naval Academy and in the United States Marine Corps that leadership is much more than just telling people what to do. A great leader actually uses interpersonal skills to inspire action rather than demand compliance of others. I can think of no better thing that's going to apply to our conversation today in sales. He began his journey as a counterintelligence specialist and behaviorist in the agency's efforts to thwart the efforts of our country's greatest adversaries, serving in Norfolk, Virginia, New York City, FBI headquarters, Guanacaste, and Fredericksburg, Virginia. Robin's received advanced training and experience in the area of social psychology, which you know I'm all a fan of, and the practical application of the science behind relationship development and trust, which ultimately led to the FBI's behavioral analysis program. He has built highly effective tools for all aspects and stages of interpersonal communication and relationship development. And he's combined these tools and techniques into a one-of-a-kind formula for success with people. Today, he's recognized expert, author, and gifted lecturer in the art of interpersonal communication, relationship building, and trust. These are skills that we use every day in sales and in leadership and in all aspects of our life, both business and personal. He's worked with clients like Merrill Lynch and the Yale School of Management. Now, I first discovered Robin's work after reading his book, It's Not All About Me, which, as you can see, I turned into a t-shirt for salespeople. And I recommend that book and his other book, The Code of Trust, to every sales professional that I work with. Thank you so much, Robin, for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Carol. We've been chatting back and forth via LinkedIn for a while. It's fun to finally meet. I'm so happy and excited for you with your new venture as well. So congrats.
Thanks. And it's always so fun to see people in person too. There's just that other level of rapport and trust that we build when we can just see people face to face.
Oh, absolutely. There is no doubt.
So as the number one distrusted profession, there are endless things that salespeople and leaders and executives can learn from your experience.
Sure.
And it seems like such a momentous task for all of us. So where should we start?
Matter of fact, I'm going out to Montana tomorrow, work with another finance company. And that's a great question. And it's actually so much more simpler than people think. It's what I call the elusive obvious. And this goes back to what you said, how you love social psychology. And here's an absolute truth with all human beings. We will always act in our own best interests. And so as an individual in sales or in leadership or anything else, if you can take the time to figure out what the other person thinks is in their best interest, you now know exactly what they're going to do. You now provide resources for them to be successful in those best interests. Now you have trust beginning. So basically what it takes you to do is discover what the priorities, goals, and objectives of the other person are. And actually, and sometimes you have to help them discover them, like work with finance companies a lot, or insurance companies. One of their goals is to provide safety and security and prosperity for them and their families should something happen to them. A lot of people aren't thinking about that, but actually if they can be good at conveying that message that this is what we're about and helping that person maybe discover that, wow, that's something that is important to me, then they can start making that connection. But again, you have to talk in terms of the priorities of others, take time to figure out what they are. And because if you're not talking in terms of what's important to them, you're wasting your breath.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I say to salespeople is you have to understand everyone has their own bias and their own agenda. Your job is to figure out what theirs is.
Yeah.
And that's really where the not about me kind of comes into play is that if you make it about yourself and your agenda, they're never going to trust you because you're only going after what they perceive you want. So
Right.
how do we do that? Like, how do we start to figure out what is going on in the minds of someone else and what really is their agenda and bias and what's in it for them? What are some tips?
Well, I mean, it depends on how much time ahead of time and lead time you have. I mean, you can always do, social networking research on the company, mission statements and vision statements of companies, because that's ultimately what that group and organization is working on or working towards. But when it comes on a personal level, it comes down to, I hate that term small talk or chit chat.
Yeah.
It really comes because it makes it seem like it's so small and granular, and it's really not. It's just, I love those open-ended challenges questions. Like, hey, what are some of the challenges you have in your line of work or industry right now? What are some of the challenges you have, maybe even just commuting into New York City? Because when you start asking those open-ended challenges questions, people are going to share with you their thoughts and opinions and ideas about exactly what's important to them in that moment. And what your brain automatically starts doing is it starts aligning what your resources are for them in terms of what is important to them. And so it's just asking those open-ended questions and offering them yourself as a resource for their success and prosperity.
Yeah, it's always that those first like 7 or 8 seconds that we start to engage with someone that they start to wonder, what we're all about. One of the things that I say to salespeople and managers is we start off a conversation with, hey, how are you today? And it's such a throwaway statement because it gives such an automatic response of, I'm great, how are you? And neither one of them actually care how the other is doing, and it's probably not really true that they are wonderful and great today. So I'll oftentimes say to them, ask, like you just said, how was your commute in this morning? Or how are you even feeling this morning? Because it just adds a little bit of something different and actually starts to get an actual real response.
I'm smiling right now at that because I just read that article too. It was a good article on the worst thing you can do to start a conversation is ask them how their day is. It's asking, and I call them the challenges questions because you can ask people about what kind of challenges you're facing. You get a pretty straightforward answer of what's important in the right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's amazing the kind of response that you'll get sometimes too. Like I've talked with people and gotten on the phone and asked them those types of questions. And I get like a 5 to 10 minute diatribe of how awful their commute was in this morning, or, that they are, feeling under the weather or something along those lines. And those are important things to know depending on, the message that you're trying to give. And if they're in a negative state of mind, you want to know that so that you can work with that.
Well, and here's why too, so it's a great thing to talk about because what you're discovering is content and context, as you had mentioned before we started chatting, of the other individual. Because as soon as you understand content and context, here's the value. Let's go back to ancient tribal man again in social psychology. All we're doing as human beings is exchanging anecdote and story to try to see if the other person accepts me for who I am as part of their tribe. Because when you feel affiliated and connected and valued by others, your dopamine starts flowing in your brain, oxytocin, serotonin, your pleasure centers are firing because you have connection. The only way you discover connection is to discover the content of someone else's context. And you're just finding affiliation. You're finding things that you have in common. And I'll even, I probably worked 22, because I worked counterintelligence my whole career before I retired. And I probably worked with 22 to 25 different nationalities. And, someone always says, how do you build, a commonality with someone from such a different culture? I said, you're not going to build it necessarily on the exact item, but you're going to build it on themes. Like one of my favorite questions always is, hey, so what was one of your favorite family holidays growing up, and tell me about it?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not going to be the same holiday necessarily, might be, but what it is we both have a favorite family holiday. We have favorite foods, smells, flavors, and so all those things, that's where you find that connection, because that's where you're saying, oh, they accept me for who I am non-judgmentally. The dopamine starts flowing. We start having trust. And when you start having trust, you start having relationships, because one of my fail-safe mottos and beliefs in all things I've done, and it took me so long to discover this, is without relationships, healthy relationships, you can achieve absolutely nothing, because everything comes down to a healthy relationship built on trust, open, honest communication, transparency, and you make yourself an available resource for the prosperity of others with no expectation of reciprocity. Because you throw that expectation of reciprocity in there, or like you're doing it for you and it's not all about me. And it blows up because the other person starts sensing manipulation. They start sensing it's about you, and there is no trust. So you got to let go of that sense of reciprocity. Now, granted, when you're given this many gifts and, and reciprocal altruism kicks in, then yeah, there most likely be that. But yeah, yes, but you can't judge what's coming back, and it can't also force a timeline either.
Yeah.
So yes,
it has to be on their timeline, their pace. And the other thing that asking those kinds of questions is it helps you to build empathy. It helps you to understand their perspective and their view of things, learning things like what's their favorite sport, or what's their favorite family holiday, or, what was their first childhood memory that stuck with them and that they've carried through all kinds of different experiences, helps you to learn and understand more about the person. And I think this is such an important thing for sales professionals at all levels to understand, because you hear the things in my profession like relationship selling is dead, or people will buy from you if they like you, and there's truths to some of it, and there's also myths behind it, where and actually that's what goes into my next question for you, because in your books and your online course you teach a formula, and it starts by being trustworthy. What do you think that would look like for a salesperson or a manager or any kind of a leader?
A lot of things are already what we've already talked about, so it's, I got all these different things I'm doing when I'm, engaging with someone, whether, I'm strategizing beforehand or live. But the first thing always is understanding what your goals and objectives are, the means goals and ends goals. Mm-hmm. And I differentiate between those, because means goals are the very granular, like I want to sell this product, I want to get this promotion. But we think we have to do those things to get to the end. And what the ultimate end of what we always do as all human beings is we're looking for safety, security, and prosperity for us and our families. So the only way you're going to get there is through relationships. And so it's really funny, is the only way you're going to do that means goal is focus on the ends goal first, which is relationships. Mm-hmm. And so being very clear on your ends goals and means goals, and then it starts flipping, because you're never going to convince someone to do something. The big thing, because convincing someone is about what you want them to do. I'm always thinking in terms of how can I inspire them to want to? Because if I'm inspiring someone, now it's flipped. Now it's completely about them, because people only are inspired to do things when it's in their best interest. So that's why the second step is, what are their priorities? Goals, wants, dreams, and aspirations, long-term, short-term, personal, professional. Because now on the third step, I'm going to seek their context. How do they see the world through their particular optic? Because again, that's where I'm going to build that affiliation and overlapping liking. And then the fourth step is talking, it's speaking in terms of them. And how do you do that? The most important thing throughout this entire thing is suspend your ego and vanity and sense of superiority to anyone, because no one wants to be looked down on anyone. They want to feel like an equal and that they're a partnership. Be non-judgmental. Absolutely key, because as soon as someone feels judged in any way, shields are up and they get defensive because you're saying you're not part of my tribe. Mm-hmm. Honor reason. I always ask myself, so honor reason is, what I'm about to say or do going to help or hinder my end goal? End goal being healthy relationship, and everything flows from there. Fourth is validate others non-judgmentally. In other words, seek their thoughts and opinions and understand them. Validation is about understanding others, not necessarily agreeing with them, because that's all people want to feel. And finally is be generous, because if you're generous with your resources without that expectation of reciprocity, that's what great salespeople and great leaders do. And so finally, the fifth step is crafting this whole encounter together. So I always start out with a specific non-judgmental validation of a strength, attribute, or action that this person's taken. So I'm always looking for someone's strengths. And if I don't know it, I'm always going to validate their time, because no one has to give it to you. Mm-hmm. Then from there, it just flows, because basically from this point, you now have to make the entire conversation about them. And you do that by including at least one of these four things to demonstrate affiliation and value in everything you say. One, seek their thoughts and opinions, because we only seek thoughts and opinions from people we value and want to affiliate with. Second, talk in terms of their priorities. If you're not, you're wasting your breath. Third, validate their thoughts, opinions, and values non-judgmentally. And fourth, empower them with choices. I always love this empowerment with choices thing, especially when I was in the FBI. I always give people the option of walking away and never being a resource or help me at all. And I've never had anyone walk away and do it. Why? It's that whole, that old Miracle on 34th Street, with Santa Claus working at Macy's. If Macy's didn't have the toy for the kids, he sent them the gimbals. And what did Macy's get? A lot of customers, because he empowered them with choices. Giving people choices is the best thing you can do, because now if you've taken time to know your goals and priorities, second step is understanding their goals and priorities. Now when you give people choices, you're naturally going to overlap them, and so everyone wins. That's my That's what I do. It's a very granular process.
And it's a process that you've studied the social psychology. I've done some studies as well. And there was one that was done by Harvard where they actually put people in an fMRI situation, and they were asking them those questions of, asking them the context. What do they think? What are their challenges? And people actually enjoy it. Releases that part of our brain in the dopamine that gives us pleasure. Enjoy answering those kinds of questions. And that's really how we're building rapport. But also, guess what? At the same time, you're learning more about them. You're learning more about the challenges that they have and how you might be able to help them solve that. One of the things I say is sales is a connection between problems and solutions. You need relationships to do that.
I love this process, because what it is, it's not just a code of trust, but it's a code of empathy. Mm-hmm. Because everything we're talking about is, I remember years ago, I am a typical type A. You look at my background that you read. I mean, I am a hardcore type A. But if you take that approach when selling something like the concept that helped the United States, to a foreign spy, you're going to fail majestically if you think you're going to use that type A behavior with them. So I really had to learn all these new tools. And it really just comes down to that, how do you reverse this entire model and make it about the other person? And so this is it. I was told when I was in the Marine Corps, I was failing miserably at my first duty station, and I was ranked last out of all the second lieutenants. I got hammered on my fitness report. I remember the major told me, said, you just need to be a better leader and make it about everyone else but yourself. And I was like, what the heck are you talking about? How the hell do you do that? I thought I was. This process is exactly that. This is the cognitive thought process for those people like me who are not born leaders and not born natural salespeople. This is exactly what you do to make it about someone else. The great thing is, because it's a process, it maintains objectivity, because that's the key. Because as long as you don't get emotionally hijacked with someone else who's on an emotional roller coaster potentially, you maintain that cognitive thought process to make sure it's continually about them. You're continuing to offer those resources for their success and prosperity.
Absolutely. And because when we get emotionally involved, and it clouds our ability to be able to see clearly the other person and understand, and it also clouds our ability to ask the questions that are going to help us to understand.
And absolutely. The thing that really is amazing about that too, not just because I from all my experiences, every success or movement forward in anything I was ever doing came through relationships. Ultimately, what happens is when you get that emotional hijacking and that clouding, you're so focused on just one issue here, you have the inability to step back, release that judgment, and see, oh, wow, this relationship here, all these other relationships might be a better way or an easier way to get to where I'm going. And you only get that through, one, having that empathy and being about others, but maintaining that honoring reason and cognitive thought process. Absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah, otherwise we get myopic. And like you said, it's like tunnel vision. You can't see anything else.
Absolutely. Can't.
And I'm a huge, fangirl of the first book, It's Not About Me. And it's funny because I read it not even realizing that you had written it. And then I read your other book, and then I'm like, oh, it's the same author. Of course it's the same author.
And another one's coming out later too. It's done. So I'm excited about that. More like the first one.
A little bit more like the first one. Okay. Can you give us a little sneak preview, like what the title maybe is?
Oh yeah, sure. It's right now it's called Sizing People Up. It is actually about predicting trust in others. But the first thing I do in this one, it's all 100% behavioral assessment, what I did first. And so instead of saying we're predicting trust, because trust can be, it's a very subjective word based on morals and ethics and liking, which can get you in a lot of trouble. It's actually predicting behavior. And I have 6 signs of predicting the behavior with 10 tells per sign. So it's shorter than the code of trust, but it's the same kind of granularity of my first one. So we're very excited about coming out.
Oh, I can't wait for that one. And actually that goes into my next question, because in the core tenets of your program and your book, you have a lot that's built around the DISC profiling, which I've been a student of as well. And one of the challenges that I have when I talk to salespeople about it is, all right, how do I tell? Because it takes a lot of practice to be able to discern whether or not someone's a D or an I or an S or a C, and how that might impact their communications and how you need to adjust your own communication style to it. There's a lot that goes on behind that. And so a lot of salespeople are like, well, how can I tell which one they are when I have 5 seconds or less to determine that? So it sounds like this book will help us to answer that question.
Sure.
But what are some of the things, if you can share maybe one thing that people can recognize, all right, this will help you to determine what type of style this person has and how to adjust it. For example, I think D's and I's are relatively easy, to see and spot. But what about S's and C's, or maybe explain what that is?
So I'll go through all four.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of quick little tells for each of these quadrants. And one thing that's important when, thinking about DISC, it's how people prefer to give and receive information. And a lot of times, possibly in that moment, not over a long period of time. It's a very instantaneous look, especially if you're just meeting someone. Mm-hmm. So really quickly, a dominant personality that's very direct and task-oriented. They're going to be pretty short, curt, and to the point. There's not going to be a lot of pronouns. There's not going to be a lot of fluff. There's not going to be a lot of asking how your day is going. There's no anecdote or story. This is pure business, short and to the point. And so what you want to do is don't take it personally. Respond in kind. Be short, to the point, and concise. A great thing to build rapport with a D is, so, hey, you're doing really successfully here. What's your next greatest challenge you're shooting for? That's going to open up a whole can of worms because D's love those challenges. And moving over to the influencer, what I call the socializers. These people are very direct and people-oriented. These are about anecdote, story, energy, thoughts, ideas. So if someone's coming at you with a big smile and a lot of extroverted words, you most likely got an I. So the way to really make that connection there is talk in kind, anecdote, story. Talk about your product around how it relates to you and your life and the people in your life. Really quick and easy. Now, S's, my steady relators on the bottom, which are people-oriented indirect. These are the ones that tend to think before they speak. They love validating others. They're supportive of others. And easy way to tell them is they ask a lot of questions about you, yourself, and your family, your priorities and goals. In other words, all the things I've been talking about are very naturally steady relators. And so my default for everything is start out as a steady relator, because you can always shift to anything else. And so steady relators also use a lot of pronouns, a lot of personalization, anecdote, story, tend to be very, very resilient and not so flexible a lot of times. So I'd recognize these people spent a lot of time in a job, in a sales position, or with a company. And if they are very personal, maybe a little touching on the arm, or lots of smiling as well, but just a little more reserved than those crazy eyes like me. Then my conscientious thinkers, these are my task-oriented folks. These are dot the I's, cross the T's, systems, processes, organization. They're also the lowest percentage out of all the ones. They're the most precise. And the rest of the world generally tends to drive them nuts because they're not following all the rules. These are very detail-oriented people, and you want to be very precise, exacting, and systematic with how you're communicating your ideas to them. So yeah. That's basically it to me. You can pick up tells pretty quick on this. Like when I'm teaching a class, I'll look it out there and I'll see that, the I's off in the corner, blah, 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 nonstop. The S's are generally sitting by themselves, and the C's are organizing their desk with all the colored pencils in one place. They got the notepad here, and it's very organized.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that's important too, and this goes with any kind of behavioral or personality test or quadrant type of test, we're not all in one bucket. Usually we're a combination of some of those things. It's just which one's going to be, like you said, the dominant one in the context in the situation that they're in right now. So
absolutely, we're a beautiful blend of all four. We just lead with one. It's like our dominant hand versus our non-dominant hand in writing. Right. Can you learn to write with the other hand? Yes, but it's not just not your preference, but you can do it. Same thing with our communication style, and you can pick it up in writing very quickly and easily too.
Yeah, and a lot of times too, like I have found that you can find sometimes, depending on the role that they're in. So for example, when I'm working with engineers, they're in that C role. They're very organized, detail-oriented. They want to talk about the work and just the work. Whereas, people who are in the S sort of category as dominant, I usually find them in customer service because they're trying to either solve a problem or make someone feel better or understand what's going on. And then D's typically are going to be your C level, where they're like straight to the point. And I's are kind of an interesting, because I see that it depends again on the context of where they are. Like I've seen CEOs be very direct in meetings, but then when they get into networking, they're very like social and eyes and want to talk about big ideas. So you've got to remember it's all about the context that they're in. And
it's the beginning and not the end. I'm a DISC guy, but I'm also Myers-Briggs guy. I'm the Neo-PR, all these things. And on example, I'm on the Myers-Briggs. I'm an ENTJ, extroverted intuitive thinking judger, which is they call life's natural leader, the executive. Oh yeah, you know what that is when you're 20 years old? Narcissistic megalomaniac jerk. And so it's about not who you are at the core, because you can't change your biology, genetics, chemistry, all the experience you have between the formative years of life. But what you can do is you can add all these behaviors onto it. So you can be as you mature, you can become very situational, and you got new muscle memory about adding all these new behaviors to yourself. And that's what I love about the code of trust. And what I talk about is it helps people that are natural born leaders and salespeople to understand exactly what they're doing so they can pass that on to others and so they can enhance it. And for people like me that weren't born with it, they actually know the process to do it. And you can start adding those new behaviors and build new muscle memory so it becomes a more well-rounded, mature individual. So you can be very situational in how you adapt to it.
Yeah, anything can be learned with enough grit and fortitude to want to learn it. And
Absolutely.
And I, by the way, I am an ENFJ, and unless I'm teaching, then I'm an ENTJ.
Super feeler, absolutely.
Absolutely, for sure. And so this question, like you had mentioned small talk in the beginning, and this is something that I hear a lot of salespeople say they struggle with. Why do you think that they struggle with this beginning part of the small talk and the building of rapport?
I think it's insecurities that come out at first. They're afraid they're not going to find an affiliation, a commonality to build tribe with. Mm-hmm. That's why I think putting in place a system of statements you can make. I'm not talking about scripting. I really hate scripting because it really limits your ability to hear what the other person is saying. But mm-hmm. just having, I think the most important thing is I call it congruence between that what you're saying and that what you're feeling. Mm-hmm. You're going in there with feeling like it's about me and trying to come up with some kind of slick line which you think is about them. You're going to get that incongruence and look like the creepy salesman. What it really comes down to is you want to make sure that in your mind and in your heart, I am coming off a resource for this person's prosperity, and all I got to do is discover if they need it. And from there, I'm going to make a friend. I'm going to have a great conversation and see what I can do to be a resource for them in their lives. That's the first thing I think is the most important, is understand how you can be a resource for the success and prosperity of others. And all I'm going to do is find out how and why. And I start out with those challenges questions.
And that answers so many problems for salespeople. One being the fear of rejection, right? Because if you're really looking for how can I be of help to someone else and it's not about you, if they say no, then okay, they don't need it right now. It has nothing to do with me or how I presented it. There's no need to be fear of rejection because they're not rejecting you.
Because the most important thing here too is, that's why if it's not going to be you, well, then it'll be someone else. Because if I leave you feeling so much better for having met me, and all that study you quoted too is from the spring of 2012 at Harvard. It was a great study. I loved it. Because as long as you make them feel better for having met you, but they still aren't interested in your product or services, well, now what do you have? Great branding. Because if not you, and because when you leave someone feeling so much better for having met you, I never think of just the one individual I just contacted and referenced and interacted with. I'm thinking about their entire sphere of influence for that day and that week. Because if I leave them feeling good, and now they're going to interact with more people the rest of the day, what are the rest of the people going to say? Oh man, you're having a great day. What happened to you today? I don't know. I just had this great conversation with this guy, Robin.
Yeah.
I didn't want anything he was selling, but man, that guy's a good guy. Here's his card if you want anything. So I tell you what, brand is what is everything.
And that's one of the reasons why on LinkedIn, when someone asks to connect with me and I've never met them or spoken to them before, I will reach back out and say, are you up to having a 15-minute conversation just to get to know each other? And people are like, that's crazy. How would you ever have enough time to be able to do that? Well, the percentage of people that actually respond is infinitely small. And then the percentage of people that actually are like, yeah, I'd love to have a conversation is even smaller. But the relationships that I've built just from one simple LinkedIn connection have opened doors for both of us in ways that we never would have done if we hadn't had that quick 15, 20-minute conversation about something.
Yeah, it's definitely I got to do something better with Carol, because literally when you reached out for me again, because, I don't know how long ago we connected on LinkedIn. It was a while.
Yeah.
And then, when you reached out, just a couple of days ago to do your new podcast, I was like, absolutely. I know Carol. Great. I can't wait to talk to Carol, because again, build relationship and you build connection, and it doesn't, it takes a village. It doesn't take a state. All it takes is a village. And when you start building those relationships, like for me in the FBI, I called my confidential human sources, that I had helping protect their national security, like five, six, 7 people total. Because they knew people who know people. If you have healthy relationships with them, they got healthy relationships with others. And that's how the world works. It's not managing hundreds of relationships. It's managing 6 to 10 really, really well.
Yeah. Influence is not about the number of connections that you have on your LinkedIn bedpost. It's about the people that you actually have relationships with. So
I call it, I'd rather have 5 to 6 or 7 people give me 120% of their effort willingly than 100 people give me 5% reluctantly.
Yeah. Because you're just trying to swim upstream at that point, and nobody's getting anywhere.
And you're not respecting them. So it's about yourself again.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it's that I have hundreds of thousands of connections on LinkedIn, but I don't know who a single one of them are, and they probably don't know who I am either. So then it's really not so much about the number. It's about the impact that you can have on each other, how well you know each other.
Absolutely.
And so we talked about this a little bit, and I know in your workshops you share 10 different techniques to help people to quickly develop rapport. We've talked about a couple. Is there any other ones that you think we should share with some sales professionals out there?
It's so funny. The weirdest one, I call it the weirdest one, because it's the one that people generally don't, or at least I wasn't doing all that much, is the first one, establishing a time constraint. Because anytime you do something consciously, in dialogue and conversation for the first time, it feels really, really weird, but the effect is magnificent. So establishing, I think, a time constraint is demonstrating to the other person, that you're respecting their time and that it's not going to go on forever. I call, the difference between sitting next to someone at a bar and saying, hey, can I buy you a drink? Shields up is like, when's this going to end? As opposed to, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm meeting my friends outside in 30 seconds. I'm in the market for a new cell phone. I ask you, what are your thoughts about yours? Because we're doing, in that one statement, you're demonstrating affiliation because you're validating that they have a cell phone that you're interested in. You're seeking their thoughts and opinions, and you establish a time constraint so they know when the end is coming. So the brains are automatically firing at that. And so I take it to the next level, not just doing it in one-time encounters or cold calling. Like when I do cold calls, when I was going to talk to companies, I say, hey, I got 30, I'm respecting your time. In 30 seconds, I can kind of give you a one sheet. I can kind of show you, how I believe I can be a resource for your company. If you don't have time now, that's great. I totally understand. I'll come back another time, or I'll leave you completely alone if you want to, because again, totally all about them. And again, I've never been kicked out doing that. But now if we want to do it on a longer term, say that, because when you walk up to someone and say, hey, you want to spy for the United States government? Shields up.
I imagine that doesn't work very well.
No. And so people still try it, as opposed to, you can put a time constraint on it and say, hey, how about this? If you don't mind, let's get together for maybe a couple cups of coffee over the next month. We can talk about each other's priorities, what we want to do, things we're trying to do in our lives. We'll see if we have any overlap at the end of the month. If we have no commonalities, we part away, shake hands, and we have a great day. That's a lot more appealing to someone than this open-ended, oh my gosh, what am I getting myself into? I built it into contracts. I work with companies as well all the time. Even when they want someone to be on retainers, like I've been asked to be on retainer for a while, I said, no. I said, because I value the relationship I have with you above what I could potentially make from you. How about we keep reevaluating this so you can assess me every 3 months? And that way you can make the choice that this is either working successfully for you or it's not. And there you go. And that way we will always maintain a healthy relationship, even if my services are no longer important to you.
Right.
And who says no to that?
Yeah. Well, because now they have control. The risk is lowered for them. The expectations have been set. And it's such a simple but powerful thing that salespeople can do, and sales managers and sales leaders can do, because it lowers the expectation in a way that they don't feel like you said, like, when is this going to end?
Right.
So you've been doing this for several years. And when I'm in respect of time, I know we have to wrap up soon, but I would love to hear a little bit about what kinds of transformations or differences have you seen in individuals or in organizations that have embraced these kinds of processes and mindsets?
I'd say and I didn't, when I first came up with the code, it's life's a process, and a journey, not a destination. My first book, 10 Techniques of Quick Rapport, that's where I thought it was at the time. And then from rapport, I understood, well, I'm doing that because I want trust. And from trust, I'm getting relationships. And when I came up with the code of trust, it was amazing what's happened. Like you say, the impact over the long term, it has literally calmed my life down, because there's no drama. When you're so focused on healthy relationships, drama starts flowing away, because you're validating others, seeking the thoughts and opinions, empowering them with choice, and not judging. Doesn't mean you agree with or anything else. You're just not judging. There's a big difference. And what happens is when you start interacting with people in that way, whether it's business or home, their lives start calming down because you're no longer stressful in their lives. And then they start being less tolerant of drama in their life. So I have noticed, not just in companies, but in my own personal life, it's a calming. It is a massive, in other words, everyone becomes very, very thoughtful and cognitive and very empathetic and understanding of others. And when you release all drama and crazy brain, I'm telling you, you can do anything, because then you have nothing but relationships, and anyone's willing to do anything for everyone else because they know you're there for them.
Yeah.
Know the resources available for them. And that was the original intent, and still is, I believe, of B2B, as being resources for each other. Well, when you remove the agenda, the personal agenda, and you actually are a resource for others, and there's no drama, that's the transformation.
Yeah. And things happen. I won't say that things happen without effort, but it doesn't, like you said, it's not as stressful. It doesn't feel like you're trying to push a boulder uphill. It's more, you're attracting these kinds of things to you through the relationships that you've established.
And that's such a great analogy. I call it knocking on the door, or you can push a boulder. Now, at my point when I'm doing this, if I start pushing a boulder, I immediately say, I am not meant to be pushing a boulder. There's got to be another relationship here that can do just exactly what I'm looking for. So I immediately take a step back and look around at the relationships. Oh, it's right over here. There's no stress. It's just trying to figure out the way through the people in your life.
Yeah. And if that's one thing that I know sales managers especially are looking for, is to be less stressed. And if there's one thing that managers, I think, grapple with, is how do I make this about my team and not about me? Because they've gone from independent salesperson all the way up into a manager, whereas a salesperson was about them and their quota. But even salespeople are stressed and maxed out. We only have so much time. Everybody's busy and distracted. Mm-hmm. And you have this pressure coming down from above of meet your quota, meet your quota. And it's hard to get that headspace of, how do I make this all about them? It's definitely a cognitive switch that you have to try and work at. And it's something you work at every single day. It's not like suddenly you've learned it and now it's going to come natural to you all the time. Because like you said in the beginning, our natural state is to look out for what's for us.
And you talk about the stresses that come through trying to make quotas or trying to please the boss with all these things. And people become fearful of time. But what people fail to realize is, if you have that depth of relationship and you start getting brands, you don't have to worry about time, because people will be beating down your door to be part of your team, part of your life, it takes a little bit of patience and not trying to force it, because anytime you try to control time, effort, thoughts, or opinions or anything, you're actually manipulating. Mm-hmm. Any attempt of control with use of subterfuge or deception is manipulation. And when it's picked up on, no one wants to be part of that. You've got to let go of it, and that's when it starts happening. And every single time I've talked to lots of companies, lots of salespeople, and at the end of these things, I never really have the guy that's been their most successful sales guy for like 30, 40, 50 years come up to me and say after me, that's what I was doing. I had no idea that was it. They're playing golf with maybe one or two people on the golf course. Take some time up out of the day, but they're trying to maintain a quota of like 100. Well, those one or two people are going back to their companies and their people in their circles, and the people they play golf with. And it happens. They'll come flocking.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us today, Robin. These are like timeless lessons that I hope every salesperson, sales manager, and leader takes to heart. I can't wait for the next book, so definitely keep me apprised, because I will probably scream it from the mountaintops just like I did the first two.
No doubt. Thank you.
Absolutely. And so I will put some links below for everyone to check out Robin's website and to follow him on Twitter. Thanks again for joining us. Stay tuned for our next episode by subscribing to the Sales Experts channel or the Unbound Growth blog and YouTube channel. Let's continue the conversation there or on the Sales Experts LinkedIn group. Check the attachments for links to both and to follow our guests on social media and their websites. Until next time.